Well, hi, everybody. I'm Suzi Taylor. I'm at Montana State University in Bozeman. We got about 3 inches of fresh snow this morning. So if anybody's in a hot place, come visit me in Montana. It's still winter here. And I told Sarah they picked an interesting day to install some new paper towel dispensers across the hall. So hopefully it'll be nice and quiet while we get started today. I see communications professional Morgan has the social media hashtags going. And if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat while we get started, that would be awesome. So everybody can meet each other. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, Sarah. All right, there we go. Hopefully, Sarah, is everybody able to see that okay? All right, great. Well, as I said, I'm Suzi Taylor. I'm at Montana State University in Bozeman with the Science Math Resource Center. We are a STEM outreach and engagement center in our Department of Education. And today I'm going to tell you about a tool that we created for self-assessment. I think it has broader use across the community. So I wanted to share this with everybody. You can try it out yourself and kind of give some feedback too. So before we start today, I do want to let you know that I am coming from the Gallatin Valley of Montana, which was common hunting ground for many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge and honor with respect the Indigenous nation on whose traditional homelands the university now stands and whose historical and cultural relationships with the land continue to this day. I apologize that I don't have more time to actually share more information about the people who lived and hunted here. But I continue to learn myself, and I hope you will too, about the people who lived where you are today. I also want to acknowledge this work is not all my own. I was helped by team members in the Science Math Resource Center, Dr. Fangjian Lau, Dr. Monty Meyerink, and Asan Salam. So let me tell you a little bit about the roots of this project. Our office is located in the Department of Education. We do a lot of outreach and engagement projects for all ages, but one of our biggest projects is the Science Olympiad. We host our state tournament every year, and there's about 1,000 kids and 100 coaches who come to that event. Well, a couple of years ago, we were doing our training for the judges for Science Olympiad, and one of the judges was a grad student from the Crow Reservation. And she said, well, how many Science Olympiads teams do you have from reservation schools? When I went back and looked at the data, the answer was pretty sad. Some years we had none. Some years we have 1 or 2, but with over 100 teams, that's nowhere near the percentage of Native American students in our state. Our state is 7% Native American, and among school-age children, it's 14%. So we were way below the representation as a population in our state. And we thought, hey, this is an opportunity for us to kind of reflect on this and to figure out what are we doing, whether it's accidental or even worse, intentional, that would create an unwelcoming and inaccessible environment for people from all across the state. So what we did, we responded to a call from our Dean of Education, who is looking for ways to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in our college. So what we proposed is that we would create a tool to self-assess our own programs, but that could also be used by other people. So basically, we wanted to see how we were doing in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our own USTEM outreach programs. We said we wanted to connect with others who do this work. We wanted to create a guidebook of exemplary practices so we can improve our own programs and others can too. And then we wanted to share the tools that we find with others. I'm going to share this tool with you in just a little bit, but I do want to share just a couple of caveats first. One is that you can see in the title, our report was called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in MSU Youth STEM Outreach. So I want to share with you, we were looking exclusively at our own programs here at Montana State University. However, I do think this has wider implications across universities and other organizations. I also want to mention that we looked at youth, so K-12 programs, although again, I think some of the findings and checklist questions would apply across the board. I also wanted to share that we looked exclusively at STEM programming. One of the very first meetings I had was with our diversity officer for the university. And she said, well, what kind of diversity are you looking at? And I realized there are so many different ways we can look at diversity, but because we had to narrow a little bit, we used NSF data on who is underrepresented in STEM. So that meant we looked at women and girls, people with diverse abilities, and people who are Black or African American, Hispanic, Latinx, or Native American or Alaskan Native. And by underrepresented, we again use NSF's definition, which means that the representation of people in STEM employment and education differs from their representation in the US population. And then lastly, I wanted to mention, we do use the word outreach. I recognize that a lot of us in broader impacts take a very broad view of broader impacts, as we should, to include engagement and co-created activities. We were looking here pretty exclusively at kind of the one-way programs like camps and competitions and workshops for youth. So just wanted to point those out. I do think a lot of what we learned will apply across the board, but those were kind of the limitations of our project given the time frame. One last thing before we get started. Did we miss anything? I'm sure we did. And did we screw anything up? I hope we didn't, but we may have. And are we still learning? 100%. So I just want to share, this tool is new to us. If you see anything that you think should be different, I would love to hear about it. We're kind of just getting started, and we want to do our very best work. So we'll appreciate any feedback that people may have for us. So next, I'm going to share a little bit about the tool. But Sarah, I'm not seeing the chat right now, but if possible, it would be great if everybody could download this checklist. We're going to do a little bit of group work in just a little bit, and I'll type it in the chat here. You should have been able to get this from the handouts when you registered for this workshop, but you can also go to this website. We have the version in PDF, which will make it a little bit easier for you to see and follow along. But we also have it in HTML because I know the PDF version is not always accessible for everyone. So whichever you're able to access, that would be great if you could be kind of looking at the tool when we start to do our group work. So let me tell you a little bit about what we made. We made an 8-page report. It has a checklist style tool, which you'll see in just a moment. There are 48 different questions that you can ask yourself or your team to kind of think about where you are in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion in youth STEM outreach. We also have alongside that some exemplary practices to consider. In the second section of the report, we look at some potential barriers to youth participation in STEM. This is really important for us to think about, what do we really need to look at so we can make it better? There are some recommendations for overcoming the barriers, and then some references and resources. This, you don't have to study this. I'm just showing you kind of a screenshot of what that checklist looks like. If you download it, you'll be able to see it much more clearly, but this is basically just the format of what we made. Whoops, sorry for the fade there. There are 4 different sections on the checklist. There's one about organization fundamentals, and that's where we cover staff and media. We have a section on recruitment for programs. We look at the population served and then our practices. There's a section on registration. We look at inclusivity, accommodation, staff, and instructors. And then there's quite a long section on program design, where we look at physical location, timing, duration, and a lot of other factors of program design and content. This is a little more close up. I just happened to capture the section about media and promotions. So an example of one of the questions you might see is, do web pages and other promotional materials include a statement of welcome to students of all identities? So that's just an example of one of the questions that you might see. Here's a couple other questions that are samples on the checklist, kind of going from easy to harder, I think, just they're easier to answer. So on your registration form, is the gender field inclusive? We found that some of our older camp forms had boy, girl. That's not inclusive of everyone's identity. Do we ask what accommodations are requested so that youth can participate fully? Again, we found that we weren't asking people what they might need to be a full participant in the program. Then we moved up to marketing. We looked at whether all forms and web pages are accessible. Here's where we found a lot of the PDFs. I'm not sure about how it is at your universities or institutions, but here at MSU, we're working really hard to make all of those materials accessible, and you can't even post a PDF on the web without having an alternate HTML version. We also looked at imagery, whether it's depicting students of all identities. Then I've got under the red headline here where it starts to get a little trickier to answer some of these questions. So do the instructors, speakers, and volunteers represent the population of students being recruited or served? Have you reviewed the content for bias? And do you intentionally involve diverse learners in program design? So I just wanted to share a few examples of some of those questions. And next here, hopefully everybody's had a chance to download the tool or at least look at it online. Maybe I'll wait just a moment here and see if anybody has not been able to access that. Would you let us know in the chat, or maybe even unmute and let us know? Okay, got a thumbs up from Megan. I don't see anything in the chat, so let's go forward then. So what we're going to do just a couple minutes of group work here. I want you to know these answers are for yourself. Some of the questions are kind of personal and reflective, so if you want to share, that's fine. If you don't, that's totally cool. We'll look at some of the answers in the aggregate, just so you don't have to share any details if you don't want to. So basically, we're going to look at the checklist tool. You're also going to need a piece of scratch paper, and you're going to make 3 columns: yes, no, and unsure or don't know. And then the first thing we're going to look at is section 1. I'm not sure if you can see this very well, but on my version, I have a printed version. Oh no, green screen, that did not work. I'm looking at the very first section of the handout that's titled Organization Fundamentals. And I'm going to transition to those questions here. So one word really quickly is that I know that not everybody here is from a university. We're at a university, so we use some words that are specific to us, like our campus. So here on the slide, I have changed just a couple of those words so they're more appropriate for whatever type of institution you may be at. We had looked very specifically at our center. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is think about your unit, not your organization overall, but kind of the place where you are, your team, and where you may be doing some youth STEM outreach work. So Sarah, I think we'll take maybe just like 2 minutes. I'll ask everybody to look at those 7 questions, whether they're here on the slide or on your handout or on the web, and just make those tally marks: yes, no, and unsure or don't know. All right, I'm gonna think we're okay here, Sarah. So the first thing I'd love to know, I'm sorry about that. Did anybody have all yeses? If you had all 7 yeses, will you type in the chat that you had 7 yeses? Well, I'm gonna ask you to do this. Circle the column of no and unsure, don't know. And if you could add that number together and type that number in the chat. So basically, I'm interested in how many questions were not a yes.
Lots of 3s and 2s.
Yeah, cool. I'm seeing that too. Great. Did anyone wish there were a category called like sort of? I remember when I was first looking at this, was like, kind of, but maybe not. So then that has to go into the unsure and don't know. I'm hoping that somebody might be willing to share either through the chat or by raising their hand. What was one of the questions that was hard to answer for you, or a don't know? You can either raise your hand, Sarah, you might help me call on somebody, or I see, yeah, somebody wanted a sort of category, or if somebody might want to type in the chat, what question was hard for you to answer or hard, just unsure?
Karen Peterman, why don't you go ahead and share?
Hi, everybody. So the last one was tricky for me to think about and answer, because most of, I considered my unit to be my company and my team, and we're mostly evaluators and researchers. And so when we see something that falls into one of these categories, it's much easier for us to talk about it as a team than it is to then think about, okay, but what are our opportunities to intervene with the client or whoever it is that we see doing doing things that aren't showing the sensitivity that we would like to see. And so that one was a tricky one for me to think about in multiple contexts.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. That's a great observation. I realized this was pretty specific to a unit of a university, and you're in a very different situation. So thanks for pointing that out.
We have a couple other folks.
Oh yeah,
Let's
Sarah, do
see
you want to just help call on people? That'd be great.
if I can find their hands. There they are. Oh, I see one hand. Megan.
I raised my hand. I think a couple people put it in chat, but number 4 was more of an issue for what I was thinking of, because I work in a research development office where our population we're serving is faculty or researchers. So it's a however diverse that population is. And we don't reflect it because we have a majority of women in our office anyway. So at least that I know we don't reflect accurately. But yeah, since our audience is very decided for us, that one was a little bit hard.
Yeah, that's a great point though, Megan. I'm in the Department of Education and we tend to have many more women than men as well. And I've thought about, do we need more men? Because we're serving equal number of boys and girls in our programs. It would just something to think about. Thanks for sharing that.
A couple of comments, those that are here can read about the second question. They're asked, they can participate as are asked. From Jessica and Lee says that with question number 7, they can report out at a university level, but not among their unit. Another agrees with number 4. So some great comments there.
Oh, cool. Yeah, thanks everybody for sharing that. I appreciate that. I'm definitely already revising in my mind the way some of these questions are worded too. And this has also helped me think about the bigger context of how we might want to use this. So next we're going to do something kind of similar, but in some breakout rooms. In just a moment, Sarah's going to help divide us into some breakout rooms. And this is what we're going to do. I think I've got a slide that has this on it. Sorry for the fades here. I think I pulled this in from a different presentation. So basically the breakout rooms will be for 10 minutes. Each breakout room will have a leader. I'm not sure how many breakout rooms we'll have. It kind of depends on how many people are in the room. But the leader of the group will be the person whose birthday comes up next. That's your birthday present to yourself. So you have to figure that out. That person will be the leader. And I hope that you will designate someone to also be a note taker. If that person is willing to share the notes with me later by email, that would be awesome. I can share them out with others, but I also understand it's kind of a quick turnaround if you can't. So the section that we're going to look at is also from the report. It's basically the last section of the checklist, and it's called the Outreach Program Design. This will all be in the chat too, so you'll carry these instructions with you. In those 10 minutes, I'm going to have you go through as many of the questions as you can. Because everybody's kind of coming from a different place, it's a little bit less important that you say yes, no, but rather think about what would this question look like when you have it with your own team back home. So that's kind of what you can talk about in the breakout room. And leaders, I know this is kind of a lot to put on you. Everybody's thinking, oh my gosh, is my birthday coming up? But I will appreciate just going, even if it's 1 or 2 questions, or if you want to get through a lot, you can skip around that list. In fact, if you want to not start at the top, that would be great because we might get some diversity of different answers. So I think we are all good, Sarah, for making those breakout rooms, and we'll take 10 minutes. Then we'll come back and just hear a little bit about, again, how did you have this discussion? What did you notice? What would you change? Awesome. Well, welcome back, everybody. I know that time went really fast. Did anybody spend 9 of the 10 minutes figuring out whose birthday is next? Okay, good. Hopefully that was not too bad. We are going to do this pretty quickly. I know it's almost 5 o'clock on East Coast time, so what I would like to do, how about breakout room 1? I would love to hear from your leader or your note taker. I don't know if you chose who is going to report out, but just tell me kind of what did you discuss? Did you get hung up on any of the questions? Were any that seemed particularly relevant for your group? And I do want to share, as I said, I've already noticed that some of these questions might be worded a little bit confusingly. So you can share now or later if you got hung up on the wording of a question, particularly if anything was insensitive or inappropriate. I totally want to know about that so we can revise it. So please let me know if you stumbled across any of those. So let's go to group one and here kind of just give an overview of what you talked about or what you found out.
I'm the first birthday, which doesn't turn out to be until 2023. So we just picked atmosphere and spent all our time on that, figuring, you know, every unit has an atmosphere, but they don't all have these other things. And so if I can sort my notes by bullet, is the atmosphere welcoming? We figured everybody wants to be welcoming. The question is how you assess that. And not to put that assessment entirely on the students once they participate, but to think about doing things beforehand in the way of piloting your program to find out from an appropriate reference group whether what you're doing seems to them to be welcoming and enjoyable, whether that be literally piloting with students who, you know, are volunteering to do that, or in some other community context. There are things you can assess that aren't welcoming per se, like degrees of engagement and participation during that. About the outreach program promoting development of relationships, collaborative tasking particularly lends itself, you know, STEM lends itself to that. And what else should we say about promoting development of relationships? I think we didn't spend much time on that one. Inclusive language. So we did note that the question of what you're including, we all think, you know, in terms of underrepresented minorities, but they're also, for example, students have been traumatized, and there are assessment tools to look at students with, you know, who've got some degree of PTSD due to, you know, any number of possibilities. Points about language are, you know, to ask students to both draw their responses to material as well as write about their responses to material, and make sure that you think ahead about having materials that enable them to do that. Yeah, I think that's about it for what's in my notes quickly.
Awesome. Thank you, Dean. Let's move on to section 2 or breakout room 2.
So we kind of jumped right down to content. And we really did one question. Is the content relevant to students of all identities? And we found out that 3 of us were essentially from the same department at one point. And I'm a newbie, so I didn't know that much about it. But our department is at Penn State in State College, Pennsylvania, which is as rural can be. And we kind of had the question, well, if you're drawing from a very non-diverse community, what does that look like? And Lee is from Raleigh, so she has a very diverse community. So for her, she's like, her mind is thinking that way, I would imagine, all the time. For us, it was a little bit different, but I think if I understand correctly, what we've been doing is looking at the clients that we serve for a particular project and try and look at it in that lens and make sure we're as inclusive to the client we're serving on a specific project as can be. And Lee also brought up some great points about making sure, even if you're in a very non-diverse community, make sure you have representation in pictures and things like that on your website and whatnot. Lee, I'm going to let you chime in, or Tiffany, if you have anything to add that I may have missed.
Oh my gosh, that was so amazing what I said too. No, I said, I'm glad you went to that content section because I think it's really important. A lot of times we rely on people from outside the center to bring in that content. And we don't always know what books or films or resources or pictures they're going to bring. And so how can we just keep an eye on that a little bit more? I don't know the answer to that, but it's definitely a question. Okay, well, let's go to our last group. Who's our leader of that one?
Hi, my name is Tiffany, and I believe that that would be our group. I wasn't aware of our group number either. We only had time to discuss the physical location and then very briefly the time and duration of the program. And we shared out some of the different things we do at each of our organizations. I know one individual shared that they bus students in from underserved populations, and since they are minors and they are unable to physically go into the labs, they have, if I remember correctly, a looking through the glass of the lab so that they can still kind of see what's going on and learn from that experience. We also talked about how some of us also take researchers and push them into the community through different organizations like Rotary Clubs and STEM-based schools, maybe middle school and high schools. And we just started really talking about the time and the duration of when it would take place and considerations regarding all of the various holidays throughout the year that you would need to consider. And Megan or anyone else from our team that weighed in, feel free to unmute and pipe in if I missed the broad overview.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
All right, well, thanks everybody. I know that was super quick overview. Hopefully you enjoyed meeting your colleagues and having that discussion. I have just a couple last things to share because I know we're almost at the end here. I'm going to screen share once again. Okay, so there is one last section beyond the checklist. You can look at that later, but I just kind of wanted to give you an overview. So basically the reason we even started this was because we were hearing that the representation of people in our programs was not the same as people in our state. So we wanted to figure out what's going on. Are we doing something accidentally or intentionally that is keeping people out? So we did some interviews with youth leaders out in the communities of Montana, and we asked them about some of the barriers to youth participating in STEM outreach through MSU. I do want to say, I don't particularly love kind of our deficit approach here. Really, I love thinking about instead the asset-based approach. What are the strengths and opportunities? But because we were looking at what can we do differently, we kind of had to know what's going on out there. So these are some of the things that our youth leaders shared with us. Obviously, they're not across the board, but they are some barriers that we could consider. So at the community level, students may be coming from a low-income community. They may be in transients, moving from one family to another, maybe 1 week to the next. They may have a low level of parent engagement. At the school level, there may be a lot of teacher turnover in the community. They may have limited STEM courses and extracurriculars. There might not be a lot of funding at the school. And sometimes teachers may be living outside the community and not be engaged with the students as they could be. At the student level barriers, we learned that there may be limited awareness of STEM opportunities. They may not even know that these opportunities exist. There may be a lack of confidence and self-esteem. There may be a lack of celebration for academic achievement. In fact, they told us sometimes it's even kind of made fun of. And then there may be an aversion to head-to-head competitive activities. That was particularly relevant for our Science Olympiad, which it's a STEM event, but it is a competition. And that's not something that every kid wants to be part of. So then our youth leaders told us, let me pull this up. These are some recommendations that they shared with us. So form long-term relationships in the community. I think we all know how to do that. Consider supporting local ambassadors. If your grant has money to pay somebody who could actually be that person on the ground in the community, all the better. Find ways to bring the families into the program. Always offer funding if you can. We have transportation, lodging, materials, and teacher coach stipends. I should have also written on their substitute teachers, because often the teachers have a role in this and they can't always get away. Provide professional development for STEM teachers. I like this one at the top of the second column, recruit students regardless of past academic achievement. Sometimes I feel like these programs are targeting intentionally or unintentionally those high achieving students, when really all students can benefit from STEM programming. I like this next one too, recruiting in pairs, teams, or groups. Sometimes when you have to apply for a program, there may be just one student selected from each community, and that can really be intimidating for a young person. They suggested that we could take away the fear of the unknown. A lot of kids in Montana have never been to MSU or to a college campus. So if we can have past participants or people from their community make a video that shows what the program will be like, that would take away some of those fears. And then we can enlist support from other university groups. There's all kinds of groups on campus who are doing work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we can partner with them some more. I just wanted to show you 2 resources that we use. The full list is on the webpage. This is a really good one from the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity Education Foundation. What I really like about this is ours is kind of a yes, no, and just a way to start a discussion. There's actually has a gradient from we're all the way there to we're not all the way there, but looking at kind of in between. That's a really nice resource. And then this one was unexpected. It actually comes from the American Dental Education Association. There's a really awesome checklist for dental schools to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion among dental schools. And so those resources are also on the website and in the PDF. I think we're at the end here. So I just wanted to wrap up with our last couple minutes. And Sarah, maybe you can help me moderate the chat or look for any hands to be raised. So I'm curious, we made this checklist kind of for us. We recognize that it might be useful for other people, but I'm curious if anyone could share, are you doing this kind of self-assessment? How are you doing it? What tools do you use and what does that look like? Sarah, if you could help me see if anybody might be willing to share, that would be awesome.
Perfect.
Yeah, this is Leah. I'll go ahead and jump in. I think this is, this resource is just a great reminder that we need to be doing this self evaluation on a more regular basis. And you've created a really nice, I think, tool for many of us to be able to use to really kind of look at our programming and are we doing the most that we can to be an inclusive program.
Cool, thanks, Leah. I'm curious if anyone has thought about using this with your team. What would that look like? Would you lead it or how would that work? I wonder if anybody might share really quickly if they can picture using this with your own group.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in again, if that's all right.
Yeah,
I mean, I could definitely see using this with my team, and maybe we each kind of take different sections and, complete it based on our own understandings and then come together as a group to see what we're doing well and what areas we really need to start focusing on for the next year of programming.
yeah, awesome, thanks. And it's a perfect lead into our last slide. Or Tiffany, did you have something to share too? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that it would be really good. We kind of do benchmarking throughout the year, but most specifically around this time of year. And I think as we start to develop out other programs and what we project to do, in the next fiscal year, I think this would be good to say, okay, let's see what we plan to do. Let's see how we can, reflect on this information. What can we do to enhance what we're currently doing? So yeah, I think that would be a good tool to use as part of benchmarking.
Cool, awesome. Well, that leads me to our last slide. I'm actually hoping that a few people might want to try this out for real and kind of give some feedback. I wish I had a giant grant from the NSF to pay you to do that, but I do not. It would just be on your own. I'd be happy to send you some of the printed copies if that would make your life easier. I'll leave my email at the end, but if anybody might be interested in doing that, I'm kind of curious, like, how long does it take? I mean, there's a lot. Can you do it all in one session? Would you break it up as has been suggested by different people? And then definitely if there's anything we're missing or anything that is just not quite right for the tool, I would love to hear about that. So in just a moment, I'll leave my email address. And if you're interested in trying this out, or even just a little section of it and want to share some feedback, that would be awesome. I think that is it. I'm actually going to stop sharing. My email's easy. It's just my last name, Taylor @montana.edu. So I guess we just have 2 minutes maybe. Does anybody have any final questions or thoughts that they'd like to share? I'll type my email here too. Cool. I see somebody else who's interested. That would be awesome if you could send me your contact info, and if you need any printed copies or if the web version is fine, that would be great. And it could be as big or as little as you want it to be. If you even just want to go through a couple questions with your team and say, this actually doesn't work, that's cool. But any feedback you can give me is appreciated. All right, well, thanks everybody for participating today. Again, if you try it out and have some feedback, especially if something's not right, please let me know. We really want to make it better and make it useful for everybody. So thanks for being here. I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit, and I hope to see you in person at the next meeting.